Hi, everyone. Welcome. I am Alex McKeag, CNU Program Manager. Thanks for joining us today on the fourth of our Highways to Boulevards webinars. Today, we are talking about affordable housing strategies, and this webinar has been made possible by a generous grant from the Ford Foundation. And if you didn't know, the Congress for the New Urbanism is a leading organization promoting walkable mixed-use neighborhood development, sustainable communities, and healthier living conditions. And we also advocate for the removal of urban freeways. If you would like to learn more about CNU's Highways to Boulevards initiative, please visit cnu.org/highways. Also, if you have any questions during today's webinar, please feel free to use the chat feature in the bottom right. And we'll try to get to as many questions as we can during today's presentation. So when freeways are removed from cities, the newly opened and adjacent land is often kind of becomes a target or object for redevelopment. San Francisco, the city most known for removing not one but two freeways successfully, the Embarcadero and Central Freeway, anticipated post-freeway redevelopment and gentrification, most notably by working to keep the neighborhoods adjacent affordable. So today we are joined by Robin Havens, Octavia Boulevard Project Manager in the San Francisco Mayor's Office of Economic and Workforce Development. By her side will be Ken Rich, Director of Development, also from the San Francisco Mayor's Office of Economic and Workforce Development. I will give the floor to Robin and Ken to share the city's strategies for expanding affordable housing opportunities in the freeway removal corridor. So, without further ado, I will give it to Robin and Ken.
Hi, everyone. Hopefully we're on. I'm Ken Rich with San Francisco Office of Economic and Workforce Development, and by my side is
Robin Havens, also with the Office of Economic and Workforce Development.
And today we're going to talk to you for a little while about Freeway to Boulevard, some lessons from the San Francisco Octavia Boulevard project. And just to get us started, I'll give a little overview. In 2000, the elevated Central Freeway was removed in San Francisco from north of Market Street. Our office, the Office of Economic and Workforce Development, led the effort to redevelop the area underneath the freeway and to dispose of some parcels that came to us from the city. I just wanted to sort of start out by saying the removal of the freeway and the redevelopment of the land parcels underneath the freeway have brought a dramatic transformation in this part of San Francisco, and we're looking forward to telling you a little bit about how we made it happen. We're going to cover in this presentation some background. We're going to cover the Market and Octavia plan, which was the neighborhood planning effort that took place around this area. We're going to talk about the specific disposition and development of those parcels that we received from the state, and we're going to talk about how we made this project work for the surrounding community by making sure it spoke to a number of different needs in the community through community benefits.
So I thought we should start off just by giving everyone a context for where Octavia Boulevard project is. So first of all, we're talking about San Francisco, and this is a map of San Francisco, and you can see the orange dot in the center really shows you kind of the area that we're talking about. And some things we wanted to really point out about this area. For those of you who are not familiar with San Francisco, this area is very close to the downtown area. So the downtown is really on your upper right-hand corner of the screen here and east of the Octavia Boulevard area. So one of the really big things about this project to understand from the beginning is that the location of the project is extremely supportive of transit-oriented uses, and it's very, very walkable. So if you live in this neighborhood, it would be very easy to walk to work. It also is located very close to a lot of transit lines in San Francisco. So you can really see that from the grid that lots of these lines converge right there by the project area, and that it is really just very close to the downtown and also just a walkable area. So next slide. I want to talk a little bit now just in general for San Francisco about the background. So this is the background for really the freeway expansion and what was known as the freeway revolt in San Francisco. I'm sure many of the viewers here are familiar with it, but we wanted to give some context just for this area so everyone understands where we're kind of coming from. So the freeway expansion, one of the milestones there was the 1955 San Francisco Traffic Ways Plan. Many folks have seen the map of freeways that crisscross the whole city, and so that when that image came out, it was a big milestone for San Francisco, and is one of the things that spurred what is kind of known as the freeway revolt, which was the next decade of various actions by the city to either truncate or eliminate some of these freeway plans. In 1959, the Board of Supervisors voted to cancel 7 of the 10 planned freeways. In 1964, there were protests against the freeway that was going to go right through the main Golden Gate Park in San Francisco. And in 1966, the Board of Supervisors rejected an extension of the Embarcadero Freeway. There was also, as you can see, the Loma Prieta earthquake is a major milestone for this project and other freeway projects in the Bay Area. So in 1989, we had a devastating earthquake that damaged both the Embarcadero Freeway as well as the Central Freeway, which will be kind of the topic of this presentation. And a little bit more about the Embarcadero Freeway. We're really not going to go into very much detail on that project today. We're going to be focusing on the Octavia Boulevard, but just also wanted to give the context that the Embarcadero Freeway was also damaged, and there was also a lot of controversy about whether to take the freeway down there, and eventually a boulevard was decided on for Embarcadero Freeway, which was completed in 2002. So I thought these images might be helpful to get a context of focusing in on the Central Freeway, which is the freeway that covered the Market Octavia, or the Octavia Boulevard. And as you can see here, it originally was a double-decker freeway that crossed many main roads in San Francisco. And you can actually really see in the bottom left-hand picture, this is looking down Market Street towards the downtown of San Francisco, and this main artery of the city was covered by a double-decker freeway. So all the freeway you see here is no longer there. Let me see, and yeah. So now zeroing in on actually the Octavia Boulevard area. Again, like I mentioned, it was damaged. The freeway was damaged in 1989 by the earthquake. So a decision, really it was a central point where a decision had to be made of what were going to be the next moves. So I'm going to go through, on the next slide, through a bunch of kind of background events and milestones that happened after the earthquake, but before the new boulevard was opened. And then after that, Ken's going to talk more about the community process that was really parallel to that, and was the Market Octavia area plan. So, great. So I don't want to get too mired in the details here, but the context for the background of the project is pretty important. So there were several really big ballot measures, 3 of them that were very controversial, that you have this first 1998 Proposition E. There was a proposition before that proposition, Proposition H, which passed, where voters said that they did want to have the freeway be rebuilt. And then in 1998, Proposition E was a ballot measure that was approved also that canceled Proposition H and allowed for a street-level 4-lane boulevard along the former freeway footprint. Also, the very next year, there was another ballot measure which did not pass, which was an attempt to bring back the freeway design. So that moves us on to Proposition I, which after the voters have approved the building of a boulevard, Proposition I started to get into the details of what the major project priorities were for that new boulevard project. I won't go in, we're going to actually go into detail of what those priorities are in a second. But then also I want to note that in 1999, there was a Senate bill that really got into the financing of the project, which required any of the proceeds from the sale of land of the freeway parcels on either side of the boulevard, which we'll go into a little bit more detail too. The proceeds from any of those sales have to go back into the funding of this project. So that's a really big milestone piece for this project. In 2000, we have a cooperative agreement, which went into further detail between the city and state about the requirements that the city had to hold to, the obligations that the city had in this transfer of these land sales. And then in 2002, we had what's called a transfer and option agreement. And that was when the city, it's an agreement between the former redevelopment agency and the city to transfer some of the parcels to fund the initial building of the boulevard. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. So also wanted to point out, the boulevard itself started construction in 2002 and was opened in September of 2005. And one last thing I want to point out is that the funding of removing the old freeway and rebuilding the new freeway touchdown was paid for by Caltrans, the state transportation agency, but the actual funding for the boulevard, building the boulevard, was covered by the city.
So to continue on with the Market on Octavia plan, here in San Francisco, we have a pretty long-standing tradition of doing some very comprehensive and progressive neighborhood plans that show how neighborhoods should change and grow. And while the discussion about the freeway was ongoing, the city began working on the Market on Octavia plan, and we'll show you a close-up of the where that was in a minute, which was an 8-year community planning effort for this area surrounding the intersection of Market and Octavia. And this was done in the context of several other plans that were being done around the city at the same time, the overall purpose of which was to plan for appropriate infill development, as we knew that our city and our region was growing, and to plan for that development in areas of the city where there was room for it and which were well served by public transit. And we called that overall program the Better Neighborhoods Program. This was kind of the flagship neighborhood plan in that program. And this plan really set the stage for the development of the parcels under the freeway, which we're going to talk about a little bit more later, as well as a significant amount of infill development surrounding the freeway. Next. Here's a close-up of the area of the Market on Octavia plan. I don't know how to, if someone can point to the freeway and the future Octavia Boulevard as shown there. This was from the plan at a time when the boulevard was still not built, and so that's why it says future. So you can see that this was a more expansive neighborhood plan, but it had as its centerpiece the fact that the freeway was going to come down and we needed to plan for this new boulevard and what sort of development would happen around it. You can see in these bubbles on the left the kind of major themes of the Market Octavia plan: housing people, balancing transportation choices, and building whole neighborhoods. And so the plan in a nutshell sort of draws on the relationship of those three ideas to create a successful transit-oriented neighborhood. Just continuing a little bit on the plan, housing was a key tenet of the entire Market on Octavia plan, and that directly informed the approach that we took to selling and disposing of those 22 parcels that were underneath the freeway. The plan gave direct guidance that the people that live in the neighborhood, coming from the people that live in the neighborhood, that we wanted to create community, vitality, and safety of place. We wanted to house a diverse group of people, and we wanted to provide different housing types at different levels of affordability. So the development program that came from these 22 parcels was directly informed by that plan. To further talk about that point, about a third of the 22 parcels that the city received from the state when the freeway was taken down have been or will be developed as affordable housing. So 7 of 22 parcels, and the net result of that is that of all the housing that will be developed along the boulevard when we're all done, that's about 1,000 units total. About 50% of those units will be affordable, which by our definition in San Francisco means affordable to folks making below 120% of median income, but in practice, it's generally far more deeply affordable and hovers around the 50 or 60% of area median income. So we are very proud of that achievement. There's probably no other plan area in the city where we've gotten up to almost 50% affordable. We've done fairly well in some of our other recent plan areas, but fairly well has meant 30 to 40%, but almost 50 is, I think, a unique achievement here. We're going to sort of move to the boulevard itself. And as we get into that, I'm just going to quickly point out that as we dealt with receiving this right-of-way from the state and disposing of the parcels and constructing the replacement boulevard, this was a very complex endeavor. First of all, we needed to deal with the state, since the state, I think in most states, the state controls and owns highway rights-of-way. And then just within San Francisco, we had a very complex amount of collaboration with all the city agencies that you see listed there before you. And my office and my predecessors in this office had to deal with sort of coordinating between all the interests and all the responsibilities of those different agencies in order to get the project done. The city had two primary obligations as this went forward. The first was the obligation to design and construct the boulevard. And that was to rehabilitate, and restore portions of the freeway right-of-way and some surrounding streets. The boulevard itself, that was built underneath the former elevated freeway, is only actually 4 blocks long from Market Street to Fell Street, and it was designed in a very complex way to contain multiple lanes so that sort of fast-moving traffic that was coming off of the remaining portion of the freeway and going out to other parts of the city could get through the area fast, as well as slower-moving lanes, which were for local residents. And we won't go into a lot of detail about the design of the boulevard in this talk, but it was quite a complex task. I think the last point I would make about that is that, as you'll see in a moment, that the termination of the boulevard terminates in a new neighborhood park called Patricia's Green, which was part of the whole structure, the whole physical design of the boulevard. The second major obligation that the city had was to dispose of 22 former state-owned parcels that were underneath this elevated freeway. If you can imagine that there was an elevated freeway with a bunch of land underneath it that was owned by the state because the state owned the entire right-of-way, both in the air and on the ground. And most of those parcels were either just vacant land or used for parking lots for years and years and years, and they were quite blighted and dark, obviously. And so what happened is these parcels became parcels that adjoined the new boulevard and were parcels that would be available for development. And part of the whole deal with the state is those were conveyed to the city for $1, and we would use the proceeds of those parcels, of disposing of those parcels, to pay for building the boulevard. And so a few points to make on those. You see a diagram here, which maybe we can point to, maybe a little bit small. It shows you all of those parcels, and the color coding, if you can see, it shows the status of each of those parcels. You can see, if Philip, if you can point to the lower parcels run directly along the freeway right-of-way, so they basically adjoin the new boulevard on either side. And then as you go north, after the boulevard is terminated, the parcels run through the existing neighborhood because that's where the elevated freeway ran through. So our office, the Office of Economic Development, facilitated disposition of the parcels. It was clear from the beginning that residential would be the primary use that we would be looking for based on the dictates of the Market Octavia plan. There were 7 affordable housing sites. If you covered up a bit of our slide there, can you uncover? Oh, I can read it here. 15 market rate sites, almost 1,000 units total before we're done, with a large focus on transit-oriented infill development and high-quality design. I hope these photos on the right-hand side are not too small. We're actually really, really proud of the quality of the design we've gotten on the parcels that have been built on so far. We've gotten sort of award-winning design, and I want to make a point of saying that that high-quality design carries through both the affordable projects, which were done by nonprofit affordable housing developers, as well as the market rate projects.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the, essentially I'm giving a summary of the next few slides we're going to look at. We're going to talk about, beyond those 2 basic obligations that Ken just described, the project needed to have significant benefits for the area community as well. So the benefits we have listed here really go into more detail about those various benefits. So, and we actually have the pictures again here of some of the market rate housing that have inclusionary housing. So I'll be talking about that a little bit as well. So next slide. All right, so very first, one of the major obligations, obviously, of the project was for the city to build the boulevard and Patricia's Green that Ken referred to just a second ago. And yeah, we're kind of pointing out exactly where it is on the map. And it used to be that the freeway went right over where the current Patricia's Green is. And now what happens is traffic comes down the boulevard and it actually takes a left right there on Fell Street to go to the western neighborhoods in the city. So where we used to have a freeway coming over, there's now an open space. And to give a little bit more context of that open space, it's right there adjacent to Hayes Street in the very center of the Hayes Valley neighborhood. So this is a neighborhood that didn't have a central open space previously and also had a freeway running right through it, and now has a very vibrant open space that is really always active and full. The open space there has a couple amenities, including a play structure, a community stewarded rotating art space in the center. It has an open green, and then at the other end, we can't quite see in this photograph, it has an area of seating shaded by a large tree. So you could bring your picnic lunch out here. It's really as a community gathering space, and it's become the outdoor central hub for Hayes Valley. So I wanted to point out too that the current freeway does touch down at the very bottom of the map that we're looking at. So the freeway currently touches down right at the intersection here of Market and the south of Market area and the bottom of the map. So one of the priorities of this project also was to make sure that the project mitigated the impacts of the freeway touching down in that neighborhood. So there was a whole portfolio of mitigation projects, we called them the ancillary projects in that area, that included a lot of streetscaping. It included traffic calming in 4 alleyways, a dog park that is currently under construction, as well as a skate park, also currently under construction, as well as a multi-use active pedestrian plaza, which will start construction next month. So that bundle of projects is a really big part of this project, of the overall Octavia Boulevard project. So to zero in on affordable housing as well and elaborate on some of the things that Ken pointed out before, early on in the process, these 7 sites were sold to the former redevelopment agency, the current Mayor's Office of Housing, and they were really used at the very beginning of the project to fund the building of the boulevard. So we wouldn't have been able to actually have the funding to start off and build the boulevard in Patricia's Green without the transfer of the sale of those 7 original sites. So to give more detail on that, of those 7 sites, 4 have already been developed, and you can see examples on the right half of your slide here of full affordable housing projects. And some of them are low income or senior housing, formerly homeless individual housing, as also the one in the bottom right hand corner is for persons with developmental disabilities. So those take up the lion's share of a lot of the counts of affordable housing that we have right now. There are also 3 sites, they're in light blue on this map, that are sites that are now or will be developed for affordable housing but haven't been developed yet. So, that process is a little bit more than halfway through. And I also want to point out that there's another type of affordable housing that happens in this project, which is inclusionary affordable housing. So for San Francisco, what that means is that when a market rate development happens, a certain percentage of the units are required to be affordable. So for Octavia Boulevard, that percentage was 15%. So for these other market rate projects, the ones that you see in red on your map, 15% of their units were required to be affordable. So when you add those together with the 7 affordable housing development sites, we get to this very high rate of affordable housing throughout the whole project, which is almost 50%. And that's all I have for this slide. So I'm going to turn it over to Ken again. We're still talking about these community benefit projects.
So one thing that we found as we were planning the boulevard was that there was a greater amount of scrutiny that came in on all of the sort of traffic and circulation in the greater neighborhood it so happens that this neighborhood, Hayes Valley, is a place where several of the differing grids of San Francisco kind of come together, and there's a lot of sort of fairly strange traffic patterns and some one-way streets that are not very pedestrian friendly. And so we committed as part of the process to relook at all the traffic circulation once the boulevard was there and sort of try to fix some of those, specifically to try to convert some one-way streets, which tended to be very fast and not pedestrian friendly, into two-way streets. And that's actually ongoing as we see, only a few years into the existence of the boulevard, as we see the way traffic patterns work and we try to adjust. So we're actually using some of the funding from
I know it's tangential to our affordable housing topic, but I think it's a really interesting part to add to this story. So interim use is happening and has happened throughout this project. The reason why is that in the middle of the project, we had the recession, and it had a very big impact on the housing market. So the city made an intentional decision to take a pause in selling parcels so that the housing market could recover and allow for the rest of the development to happen along the project. So when the city made it clear to the community and that there was going to be a delay in selling and developing all these parcels, the community expressed a clear desire that they didn't want these parcels to sit empty for several years, creating blight in their neighborhood. So the mayor's office, OEWD, issued a interim use RFP, request for proposals. And that RFP, asked for all sorts of creative ways to keep these parcels active during that interim time before the parcels could be sold and developed. So you see some examples here of that interim use. Some of them, like the bottom right-hand corner, you have a picture of the Hayes Valley Farm. So the Hayes Valley Farm was a project on parcels O and P, very big parcels. And it was just a really fantastic interim use project that wrapped up last spring. There's also Proxy Project, which is on parcel K and L in the middle of your map. And that is a mixture of all sorts of interesting active retail uses by the Proxy Project folks that include a really neat use of shipping containers and all sorts of really innovative uses over there, including coffee and a wonderful ice cream shop, as well as a really fantastic beer garden. And you can see that image right there on the top right is an image of the beer garden space, which is right adjacent to Patricia's Green. In addition, before the pedestrian plaza could be built, and down in the very bottom of the map, the very small little square right there, that end of the street was also going to stay empty for a fair amount of time. So over the last 2 years, we've been doing we've partnered with Off the Grid in San Francisco and have been doing food truck markets down there. Then these really give the community a gathering space in the interim of the new community benefit parks that are coming into that neighborhood.
Next. So this is our last slide. We just wanted to talk about some lessons learned, and certainly this can be a topic of questions and answers after we're done. First of all, there was a ton of community process, both around the neighborhood plan, which focused on land use and urban design and zoning and things like that, and on the actual boulevard process, which focused on the design of the boulevard and some of the community benefits around it. And something like this is so significant a change to the neighborhood that you really need a lot of community process. So that was one lesson learned. The second lesson learned was the large package of community benefits, which was pretty varied and involved new open spaces and pedestrian improvements and affordable housing. We think was also necessary to satisfy the very diverse constituencies that cared about what happened with this boulevard. The next one was, I think anytime anyone does this, it's a real knot of coordination and collaboration among different agencies. And, we usually have enough complexity just within our city government getting things done. But when you add the state, it's another level. And so you have to be prepared for that. And then lastly, with the interim use challenges that Robin just went over, or the interim uses, which frankly have been incredibly successful and cool, the biggest concern really is sometimes they're so successful that you get a lot of resistance to when it comes time to move them along and continue with the permanent proposal, which in this case is market rate and affordable housing. You get folks who had so much fun with the interim uses that they're not so happy about it, and we've experienced a little bit of that. And it's just something to be aware of. I don't think it's a reason not to do the interim uses, but I think the lesson is make it very, very clear to people that there is a final form that this is going to take, and these uses are interim until that happens. So I think with that, we're done, and we'd be happy to answer any questions or comments.
Okay, great. That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Ken and Robin. That was really great. I want to start off with a question in regards to parking. And it was my understanding that in San Francisco, with the Market Octavia neighborhood plan, there was sort of a change with parking requirements. And I think it was something like it was required like one space per unit. Um, and they reduced that rate, and it has maximums that are much lower. And I was just curious if you can kind of speak to that and why that was important and what that's done for affordability within the Market Octavia plan.
Do we have? Am I on? Okay. Parking is a huge planning topic in San Francisco as a whole, and up to about 10 years ago, our standard zoning throughout the city generally required a minimum of one parking space per residential unit and a maximum of something bigger than that. And as we've gone through and done our neighborhood plans, including and most notably the Market Octavia plan, but by now a good chunk of the city has been replanned and rezoned like this. We've converted the parking minimums to parking maximums, and they vary by neighborhood. In this neighborhood, the parking maximum, there's two different types of zoning in this neighborhood, but without getting into the weeds on that, the parking maximum is generally one space for every 2 units, and the ability to go a little bit above that through a conditional use from the Planning Commission. So we've cut in half the amount of parking that generally can be supplied, and there's a number of reasons for that. I imagine a lot of people watching are sort of familiar with the urban design and transportation reasons why we would do that. It was particularly important just to make sure that the new development had really great street-facing characteristics, didn't have parking taking up, sort of creating a blank wall along the street, and because this area is really the confluence of traffic coming from all over the city. It's got a major city traffic carrying boulevard going through it, and people were concerned that we tried to minimize traffic as much as possible. The interesting thing I'd say is we have a neighborhood group in this neighborhood, the Hayes Valley Neighborhood Association, which unlike many neighborhood groups has actually been very active every time. Generally what developers will do is they'll come into the city with a proposal that keeps parking at as much as they can get. So generally they're looking for one space for every 2 units. The neighborhood group will generally come in and advocate for less, and usually the developer will compromise and go down to something less than one space for every 2 units. That's a phenomenon that even in San Francisco is pretty rare, and we love watching it happen.
Great, yeah. Parking is extremely important. I think you're right. In San Francisco, I was reading something like typical how parking in San Francisco costs about $35,000 to $50,000 per space. It's incredible. So I want to go to a question from Patrick Kennedy, who himself is working on a campaign in Dallas. His first question that he had was not specifically about affordable component, but speaking more to before the tear down and the land having the state give land to the city. Was there an environmental impact statement required, or simply some sort of environmental assessment?
This is before my time, but I'm fairly sure I'm right on this. The tear down of the freeway and the transfer of the land would have required a full environmental impact statement under the California Environmental Quality Act. The Market Octavia plan, this is interesting, the Market Octavia plan, which involved a change to land use regulations and to zoning, underwent its own environmental impact report. And what that did is it cleared all of it sort of was a master environmental impact report that said we're now going to require projects to have this much parking and be this tall and all of these things. And if projects one by one as they come in fall under those guidelines, they need minimal environmental review themselves. So one of the problems we have here is sometimes development projects take forever because they need their own environmental impact reports. And what the plan is, it provided a master umbrella environmental impact report and allowed projects to move forward with less environmental work, which is probably the biggest time-consuming part of getting projects approved.
Right. Okay, cool. Another question that we had is from David Drews, and he's asking kind of what's the time frame for housing along the boulevard itself. So you had said you're about halfway through the process or the build out of housing units. So maybe you can speak to what's coming up, what's next, and when it will be completed and things like that.
Great. So that's a really good question because, as we noted, the project is not done. It's well into our sale of these 22 parcels. The first 7 parcels were for affordable housing, and those have, been taken off of this big list of 22. And then we, through all different sources, have dealt with other parcels, but we do have 7 remaining parcels, which we do anticipate most or many of them will be wrapped up, the sale of them, in the next few years. That doesn't mean the development will happen in the next few years, because once we work to do the disposition of parcels, it then takes several years for those developments at their own rates to be completed. Some of the parcels are under long-term leases, so they may not be developed in that time frame. But generally, the remaining parcels will go in the next several years through their process.
Hi guys, sorry, this is seems like we're having some technical difficulties. If you can hear me, I'm going to read. I have a question of my own, and then I'll probably follow up with one of the other ones. This is Tim Halber from CNU. Oh, no, it's not working. Hey, can you hear me now? Hey, this is Tim Halber from CNU. I'm the communications director. Hi guys. So I'm going to read a couple of questions, also from the people who are writing in, but I had one myself as well about. A lot of our listeners are going to be in places that the land values when you take down this freeway aren't going to be as great as in San Francisco. And I know a lot of what was possible there was made possible by the fact that you were able to sell the land to make the boulevard. I wondered if you had any thoughts on places that don't have that extreme land value, where they would be able to find the funds to make this this kind of stuff happen.
If I think I understand your question. I mean, we a couple of things. We got the land free from Caltrans, the state highway agency, and it has a lot of value. But we don't actually. The funding that's used for us to build affordable housing actually comes from other places. So the funding that we use to fill the gap, the gap in the affordable housing pro formas, didn't really come so much from the land, because in fact, our housing agency paid close to market rate for the land, which was interesting. That's where we got the money in the beginning. This was a kind of unique deal where our housing agency said, we will buy 7 parcels from the city at close to market rate. And that's where the city got the cash to build the boulevard. Otherwise, the city would have taken much longer to build the boulevard. So we did not actually get the affordable housing by giving the land to the housing agency for free. The housing agency developed the affordable housing through its, and this is why they are still going and it's taking a long time. They're using their normal sources of funding, which involve a whole variety, and I'm not necessarily familiar with all of it, but tax credits and in lieu fees that other developers pay and all the other things that pay for affordable housing. So I guess my main point here is that this was done without free land to the housing agency, which is an interesting thing.
Certainly, I guess I read in your proposal there that much of the construction of the boulevard was funded by the sale of parcels. So that was where I was coming from with that question. You're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. So your question was if you don't have the high value land to sell in order to build the replacement for the freeway. Oh, I apologize. That you were looking for where that funding would come from. That's a good question. I don't know how to answer that exactly, and I know that it's hard to find that money, and I'm not sure where we would have found it if we didn't have the boulevard value, the parcel value, to do it with.
Fair enough. I'll go ahead and go to one of the other questions we've had written in. Ben Luckins asks if the overall plan has an urban design component.
Yeah. Oh, am I on? So by the overall plan, I don't know if he's referring to the physical boulevard or the Market Octavia plan. The overall neighborhood plan absolutely had a huge focus on urban design. It was one of the biggest focuses. And if you read the Market Octavia plan, which we can give people access to, I think our emails are up at some point, and we can certainly give people a link to that. It's got chapters and chapters around the sort of urban design that we're looking for new infill development. So yeah, it was a huge focus. And I would say that, let me just to continue on that for a moment, when we disposed of the first bunch of parcels, many of which are either built or under construction, rather than just sort of selling to the highest bidder, we did an RFP, and we asked folks in their proposals to the city for people who are proposing to purchase land. They were making a business proposal to us, and how much will you offer us for the land? They were also making a design proposal to us, and we chose the winning proposers based not only on their business proposal, but on what they proposed to build. And we had a jury that consisted of folks from our planning department and other urban design folks, and we picked the best design, which frankly I think probably was a higher. I think most of the value proposals were probably close together, and what distinguished the projects that we picked was their actual design excellence. And I think if you walk around and you look at what's been built, you can see that worked. It's the best design of any new development in the city, I think.
Great. And on that, I was curious when you were talking about public process, about what sort of results you got. What were the things that the neighborhood and the community spoke most vehemently for and vehemently against about what they wanted in their community?
I can talk a little bit about this because I worked very closely on some of the ancillary projects. These projects right there, down there at the where the freeway touches down, and that was has been a very long process. I think our count of community meetings there is above 15 at this point, just to talk about the projects that could go on in that area. So we really heard priorities from those neighbors. They were involved in some of our community advisory committees that are ongoing as well, and said things like, in the alleyways, the traffic was moving through too fast. So that's where the traffic calming desire for those alleyways came from. They're actually, the dog park, there's an especially large number of dog owners in the area, and they're very far away from places they can have open space for their dogs. So that was one of the reasons why the dog park came along, as well as the interest in an active use of the pedestrian plaza there. So even though it's such a large project, the large project actually covers several kind of sub-neighborhoods. So, we had meetings that were obviously part of the Market Octavia plan that covered a very broad area, but then there were sub-meetings and sub-outreach to neighborhood associations in relevant areas of the project, just to make sure that everything was really addressing localized needs, as well as looking at the broad points.
And I'll just add to that in a more general sense in terms of what the community, the kind of major thrust of the community conversation was. And this is just a cautionary tale for folks I know who are looking at their own freeways. The biggest single, to be no surprise, the biggest single conversation around this was what's going to happen to traffic in our neighborhood? How bad is the traffic going to be on the surface when we pull down the freeway? And they had to spend, I was not working on the project at this point, but excuse me, they had to spend a long time convincing people, and not everyone was ultimately convinced, that the boulevard would carry the traffic and that there wouldn't be a huge traffic jam, every day at rush hour through the area where the freeway used to run. And so that's kind of why the boulevard had so much thought that went into the sort of the traffic configuration and all of that. And so obviously that's almost a given, is that's going to be your biggest single conversation. Then after that, you're looking at the open space amenities and the character of the building that's going to happen and the pedestrian safety and things like that. But you first have to get through the traffic issue.
Okay, I'm Alex is back now. So I kind of want to speak a little bit about land value again. And I know in the Embarcadero corridor, with its adjacent, waterfront, I think property values went up something like 300%. So I was wondering if you could speak to property valuation in the Octavia Boulevard corridor. But then on top of that, kind of looking at another question we received, just maybe talk about what sort of private development has happened in the corridor, what sort of renovations or development has happened since the freeways have been taken down and since your work has started with affordable housing, and sort of maybe talk about how the neighborhood's changed in that sense, what sort of investment's been put into it.
So the short answer is, just like the Embarcadero, this part of town, generally we call this Hayes Valley, is the neighborhood of San Francisco. Since the freeway came down, there's been an utter explosion in property value. The neighborhood has gone from being, one that probably most people wouldn't have even said that they ever went to possibly the most sought after neighborhood in the entire city for a residential and small neighborhood commercial type of neighborhood. It's sort of, I can't overemphasize the dramatic transformation in the neighborhood. I don't have numbers on the top of my head, but in terms of property values since before the freeway, easily the same 200 or 300 or 400% that we saw there. City as a whole has gone through a lot of property value increase. Condos, private market rate condos in Hayes Valley are selling for well over $1,000 a square foot. So it's a very dramatic thing that's been happening. I can't remember the second half of your question.
It was more specifically speaking to like what sort of private development kind of came in, and how the neighborhood looks and feels different based on the development.
So, there's three. For those who know the neighborhood at all, there's three kind of zones of proposed new development that have came out. One obviously was these 22 parcels that were available. So the biggest concentration of new development is right along the boulevard, and we got a lot of private market rate development. Some of it built, some of it still under construction. Also to the west along Market Street, west of Octavia, folks who know that area going from Market up toward Castro Street, there's a lot of kind of irregularly shaped infill parcels, and those are now all under construction or already built with new rental and ownership development. So we've seen a ton of new market rate development. As I said, this is probably the most desirable neighborhood to develop and to buy residential property in the whole city. And I think some of it is just due to the overall lifting of the economy in San Francisco, but I think the transformation of this neighborhood is responsible for why it's now, the hottest neighborhood in the city probably. So the removal of the freeway was absolutely a huge event.
Great, and this is sort of an overarching question. I think you've addressed it a little bit so far. Just maybe thinking about how have you guys addressed fears of gentrification? It's a word with a stigma. Maybe it's kind of waxing, or maybe it's waning now. But in San Francisco, I'm sure it's an issue. So if you can kind of talk to that.
Sure, it's increasingly an issue in the whole city, and I don't know that what we're doing in Hayes Valley is different than what we're doing in the whole city. And I could talk for way too long on what we're doing in the whole city. I'll try to just say a few things. I mean, our basic strategy around this is that to embrace the fact that people want to live and work in San Francisco, and that therefore it makes San Francisco attractive for development and it makes it command a high price, and to basically leverage that value into a lot of affordable housing development. So the biggest thing that we were able to do in Hayes Valley is make 50% of all these new units almost affordable, fairly deeply affordable. One of the things that we are struggling with now, and it's not just Hayes Valley, but the whole city, is we haven't had good tools to develop to address that middle range. So if you are quite wealthy, you can afford to live in San Francisco, and we do extremely well compared to almost any other city in providing housing for folks below median income. But folks at around median income or a little bit above median income are having more and more trouble in San Francisco, and that's something that we're trying to turn to now citywide, is to look for ways to make folks, the example we use is, and incomes are pretty high here, so we use a family of 4 with 2 working parents, each making $75,000 a year, as about the top end of what we think we need to provide for through some kind of public action. Right now, folks in that income range are a little stuck because they can't, it's hard for them to afford to buy or rent new housing, and they don't qualify for the low income housing. So, our strategy is really to keep seeing the development occur and to develop as much affordable housing of various income levels as we can. And again, it's going to be difficult to ever, without some pretty massive subsidy, it's going to be difficult to get to that 50% range until we have another freeway with a bunch of land under it to deal with. But where we have a lot of land, where the city owns land, we try to do as much as we can and get those numbers way up there.
Yeah, great. I know it's an issue in San Francisco, of course. Like affordable housing just being just affordable. It's tough for other places that have different housing markets to kind of look at the cost of, even an affordable unit in San Francisco and think, hey, that's affordable. But there's another question here from Patrick, and asking sort of about the design aspect of things, and he was wondering if the market rate housing has the same design-based RFP process as the affordable developments do.
So what's interesting is whenever we go out with an RFP for affordable housing, so the city often controls land and goes out with an RFP and looks for a developer for affordable housing. There's always a design component in that. There always has been. What was new is that we did this with the market rate side, and we focused a lot on design. Sometimes in other areas of the city, our affordable housing turns out to be better designed a lot of the time than our market rate housing, for exactly that reason, that we focus more on it. We have more control because our funding can be made contingent on a design that we like. On the market rate side, obviously, when we own the property, as we did here, we have a lot more control. And instead of dealing with a private sector developer coming into the city with a proposal and then us being a regulator and having to sort of say, well, we like that or we don't, we have limited power there. When we own the land, we simply don't make a deal with someone until we are satisfied with the design. And in some of the transactions on the market rate housing, we, much to the chagrin of some of the developers that we were working with, we were so concerned that we negotiated, I don't know how to describe this, we negotiated post-closing checks on what they were building. So basically, we developed an agreement in our sales agreement that said that sort of said, what is this going to look like? And if they sort of moved forward somehow with a different design than the one we expected, we had some clawback powers on the actual transaction. So that was very difficult to negotiate, and there was a lot of resistance from the developers to doing that. But we made it very clear that we were determined to get the best design from the market rate housing, yes.
Great. So we're almost done. I had read that some of the units are as small as 20 feet wide. Is that correct?
Do you want to take that one? Or there are 4 parcels along the east side of the boulevard that are not yet developed, actually not yet sold, that are very, very narrow and would have really small units. And we've gotten, we have some very creative developers and architects in the city, and we've gotten some proposals on those that say, yeah, we can really do this. I mean, we can really develop on a lot that is 20 feet in depth. You know, they're long and they're wide and they're narrow, and so we're interested in seeing how that works out.
And also, it's sort of trendy now at this time, so it works out. Okay, well, I think we're running into the end of our hour. I want to thank you both for joining us. This was fantastic. Robin and Ken from the San Francisco Mayor's Office of Economic and Workforce Development. We really appreciate you guys joining us today. We think that your lessons today can be applied to several dozens of campaigns that are happening across the country right now. So again, thank you so much. I just want to say we'll be back, CNU will be back with another webinar in February. So check back, and while you're waiting for that, feel free to visit cnu22.org and take a look at what's happening with our upcoming Congress in Buffalo. If you guys, some of you want to stick around and use the chat feature at the bottom to ask some questions, feel free to do so. This presentation was recorded today, and we'll post it within a week or so others can take a look and learn from Robin and Rich well into the future. So thank you guys so much. Appreciate it.